Welcome to Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Gemini, and we are welcoming back Susan Weed as part of our Health and Wellness series. We are shifting our focus for the next 4 segments to focus on the men in our lives and prostate health. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio Network.
I'm so glad to be back with you here. Really enjoyed getting to talk to you about menopause and perhaps change some stories and some life in terms of looking at menopause from the Wise Woman tradition. And I hope that I can do the same for prostate and men. And that's what we're going to be devoting our next 4 shows to.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. Let's get started.
Okay. A lot of the information that I'm going to be sharing with you, I have in my book down there, Sexual and Reproductive Health, the Wise Woman Way. And I really enjoy in this book the opportunity for the organs to speak for themselves. And so I'd like to get started by reading from down there, Sexual and Reproductive Health, the Wise Woman Way, what the prostate has to say about itself. I am the center of the future. I am the glory of the past. I am the wormhole that joins the generations and spans the universes. I am eternal. I am designed by competition. Your ancestors' bequeathed my subtlety and strength to you. I help you win the race. I help you continue the race. I protect you. I join with your immune system to keep you safe. I speak to you through gut feelings, through intuitions and emotions. When I am threatened, I swell. When I am angered, I become inflamed. When I am sad, I choke up and ache. When I am pleased, I warm you like an inner fire. When I am delighted, I guide you like an angel of mercy. Move me, move me, move me, rock me back and forth. Rock me, rock me, rock me, sway me from side to side. Walk me, run me, stroll me, dance me, just don't sit on me all day. I crave motion. I crave activity. I am your craving. I thrive on lust. I am your lust for life. I am filled with desire. I am your desire to cheat death. I am ready for the challenge. I am prepared for the task. I am steady. I am up for the journey. Trust me to hurl us into what is to come, what must be brought forth. I am your center. I am your prostate.
That's magnificent.
Yeah, when these organs, speak for themselves, I learn so much.
Yes.
And they speak to what we tend to call holistic medicine. That they really tell us that they are our body and they share our body, and that the thoughts and feelings that we are having, of course, influence our biochemistry. So we all start out life as little girls. And the uterine environment is very high in estrogen. If we have XX in our cells, then we utilize that estrogen in the uterus and we retain our female sexual organs. If we have XY in our cells, we cannot utilize that estrogen very well, and our female genitals morph into male genitals. The uterus becomes the prostate. 。 The ovaries, of course, descend through the abdominal wall and become the testes. And one would say, well, gosh, doesn't the clitoris have to grow a lot to wind up being a penis? But ounce for ounce, centimeter for centimeter, there's as much erectile tissue in the clitoris, much of which lies below the surface, as there is in the penis. So, no, in fact. Still using the same amount of tissue, just as women, we tend to be a little more secretive. And yet, isn't the prostate kind of a man's secret? I often think about that when I think about women being secretive and how men can be very secretive about their emotions, and not necessarily secretive because they want to be, but secretive because they haven't created pathways for their expression. And how the prostate, as a uterus, swells up with these things and needs to give birth to these things. So if we think of the prostate as a uterus, we begin to see it in a very different light. Now, of course, it's different in some pretty important ways from the uterus. And one of those ways is that the prostate has kind of like a hard surface, like we might compare it to like a rind on an orange. And so when it gets inflamed or swollen or infected, there isn't anywhere for it to go but in. And that wouldn't be so bad, except that the tube that connects the bladder to outside goes through it. Think of the prostate as being a really puffy bagel. And that tube for the urine to go through goes through the hole of the basal and, of course, then out through the penis and out into the world when we urinate. And so when the prostate swells up, then it swells around that tube. And this causes lower urinary tract symptoms, which we're going to talk about next week, and talk about how we would deal with those. And next week we're also going to be talking about just what's called benign swelling of the prostate. I kind of think of it as the letter soup next week, because we're going to be talking about LUTS and BPH, and of course PSA, prostate-specific antigen. The prostate cells are active and changeable from the time that they're created in utero until the time that they mature at puberty. And once the prostate is mature at puberty, it goes into a state of suspended animation in a way. The cells don't change or replace themselves anymore. It goes into balance. And unfortunately, balance is not lifelike. And so what happens to a man between the ages of puberty and what's loosely called midlife, or we might say between the ages of 15 and 50, is that the prostate is a sitting duck. It's sitting there. It's being exposed to oxidative stress. It's being exposed to radiative stress. It's being exposed to chemical stress through food that we eat, as well as environmental exposure. And the cells don't have any way to actually repair themselves because they're not active, they're balanced. And at midlife, it's like the story of Sleeping Beauty. The prostate wakes up. Who knows, maybe some beautiful woman comes and kisses it, dreams. But suddenly the prostate wakes up and says, oh my gosh, where have I been all these years? And starts to actively repair and rebuild cells. But what this really comes down to, the short of it is that virtually all men have prostate cancer. At the age of 50, 50% of men have prostate cancer. At the age of 60, 60%. At the age of 70, 70%. At the age of 80, 80%. At the age of 90, 90% of all living men have prostate cancer.
Wow.
So the last 2 weeks, of this series. We're going to spend an entire show talking about what to do to prevent your prostate cancer from killing you. You've heard it before, and we're going to talk about the fact that the vast majority of men with prostate cancer die of something else. So we're going to talk about how you can die of something else, because we all eventually are going to die. And then our last week together, we're going to talk about what to do if you have a diagnosis of prostate cancer. And that will go all the way from watchful waiting, which is don't do anything at all, to very strong interventions like the insertion of radioactive pellets, surgeries, and so on. So we're going to spend some time really looking at all of those options and what studies have to say to us about doing those things. So in a very real way, men don't notice that they have a prostate, because it's something that's been there but hasn't been doing anything except what it's supposed to do, which is to produce prostatic or seminal fluid, which is the primary component of semen. Semen, of course, carries also the sperm, which can fertilize the egg, but most of the semen is actually prostatic fluid. The prostate also functions as a valve to keep urine and sperm moving in their proper directions, and is primarily responsible for the strong sensations that men have when they have an orgasm, because at that point it acts like a pump, and that rhythmic pumping is a very strong part of orgasm. And I want to be very clear here that both urinary health and sexual health have a strong tie to prostate health, and that anything that we do to improve prostate health will probably improve urinary health and will definitely improve sexual health, and that conversely, anything that we do to injure the prostate will have an adverse effect on our urinary health and can have a very adverse effect on our sexual health as well. I had no idea, because I don't hear from as many men as I hear from women, that when it comes to down their biopsies, modern scientific medicine is an equal opportunity destroyer and harmer of sexual health. One story in particular, which I do recount in my book down there, comes from a dear friend who loves to go out sailing on his boat, and he's preparing for a 2-year sail. And he decided to have a checkup, and the doctor said, well, we should test your PSA. And the doctor subsequently called him and said, well, your PSA is elevated. He says, now, ordinarily what I would do is I would wait 3 to 6 months and test you again, because having elevated PSA, is not really that strong an indication of something going awry. He said, but you're going to be out on this boat for 2 years, and that just makes me really nervous that I would overlook that you might have cancer, and here you would be out on this boat and you wouldn't know about it. So I think you should have a biopsy. And my friend said, well, what's that? And the doctor said, well, just cut a little piece out of your prostate. I wish that doctors would be encouraged to be more specific in their truths. Last time I heard, a prostate biopsy involved taking numerous samples from throughout the prostate. 7 to 10 samples is usual, as I have heard. And in my friend's case, the biopsy left him impotent.
Oh, gosh.
He can function sexually the way he wants to if he takes drugs.
Mm.
But the prostate is innervated. It has a lot of nerves and nerve endings that go to it. And if you're going to be taking that many pieces of tissue from it without truly being able to see where all those nerves are, we couldn't blame anyone for accidentally nicking a nerve. There other men have told me that they have become incontinent after a prostate biopsy. Now, I've argued for a long time for women not to jump to have a cervical biopsy if they get a bum pap smear. Or nowadays, if they have if they're found to be, shall we call it, guilty of having human papillomavirus, which a great many people have, and the vast majority of people get rid of very easily. Having a biopsy of the cervix similarly can interfere with sexual functioning, and for many women, more to the point, it can interfere with the ability to have a healthy and natural pregnancy and childbirth. So one of the things that we find that modern scientific medicine does is it rushes us along to invasive procedures that can have very strong consequences without really explaining to us what these structures are and how they function in the body. And I'm sure that, if most men were told you're less likely to die of your prostate cancer than of a heart attack, they probably would not be so quick to say, yes, let's do a biopsy. Another function of the prostate, as it's said to us, is that it works with the immune system. And once the prostate has been biopsied, it is more difficult for it to do that. Certainly all living tissue is capable of healing itself. But we also know that healing, especially of soft tissues, usually leaves scars and usually impairs in some way the functioning. So, before I go any further, it's just so much in my heart to share with all of the men listening this great tip for preventing prostate cancer, and I really hope that this makes your day, and that is eat more pizza.
Oh, really?
Pizza is a great way to help prevent prostate cancer. First of all, it contains tomato sauce.
Right, okay.
Right, and that tomato sauce has been cooked at very high heat. And that makes all the goods, all the vitamins that are in the tomato ever so much more available and absorbable by our bodies. Then, if you ask for extra garlic on your pizza, well, we see a really strong association between eating garlic and eating onions and lower rates over all of cancer, but especially prostate cancer. So you can really get an extra bang there out of your pizza. And in fact, omega-3 fatty acids are very important in helping to keep the sexual organs functioning well and helping to prevent cancers in the sexual organs. And so we could have anchovies on our pizza. They're little fish, so they don't pick up much mercury or radioactivity, and they're a great source of omega-3 fatty acids. And the even better news is it's just as effective cold the next morning.
Mm.
So,
well, that has to make a lot of men happy then to hear that.
I am definitely hoping that it will make quite a lot of men happy. So if we think of the prostate as not just something that something is going through or something that is like kind of subsidiary to reproductive function, but an important organ in its own right, and one that, like the uterus, has needs to be creative, then I think we begin to understand more what the prostate is telling us when it's telling us, keep me moving. I don't like to sit still. And I'm very happy that as a culture, we're really starting to get this. It's been kind of slow, but over the past 15 years, we've seen much greater adoption of walking meetings, so that instead of sitting around at a meeting, people walk while they're having their meeting, and even slow-moving treadmills in the office rather than desks. Walking at a mile an hour, you in fact hardly even know that you are walking, and yet think about it, over a typical day. what would you walk? 4, 5, 6 miles? Instead of spending that time sitting on your prostate, and for women to sitting on your bladder. So that for all of us, sitting around a lot, especially sitting in chairs, can have a softening effect on the muscles and the ligaments and tendons that are needed for good urinary functioning, rather than the pelvic floor and the ligaments and the tendons that hold those organs in place actively doing their work. Instead, it's kind of like we're just plopping it down somewhere. You look at pictures of native people, and generally they are in a squatting posture. Or if they're sitting, it's with their knees pulled up, or in what some people call an Indian pose, all of which really strengthen these structures, especially the prostate, which, unlike the uterus and the bladder, does not have a lot of support from surrounding tissues. In a woman, the organs are fairly tightly packed down there in the lower abdomen. And so they kind of, as a sisterhood, hang together, whereas the prostate, like many men, has to hang by itself. So
It makes me wonder, Susan, then about men that ride bicycles long term. Lance Armstrong and other bicyclists, that's what they do for their main form of exercise. They're moving, but they're still sitting on their prostate then.
yes, and I think that it is an issue, and that they fight back with special seats.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, and special clothing as well. My knees don't like bicycling. They're happy to carry my body around, but they don't want to carry them.
I understand.
So in the following weeks, we're going to be looking, as I said, at some difficulties that can come about with the prostate. For basically the first half of a man's life, the prostate is unimportant, invisible, and just completely unnoticed. However, normal hormonal changes that occur for most men between the ages of, shall we say, 40 and 55, cause the prostate to wake up. Testosterone prompts cellular proliferation, and things start to move, and that can mean that the prostate gets big. And the real, and we'll talk about this in more detail, but the real difficulty here is that from, shall we say, the outside, we don't have any really good way to say, oh, your prostate is getting big, because, wow, here you are in your second puberty and things are jumping, and now your uterus wants to give birth to ideas, or you have cancer. Because basically, they both cause the prostate to get bigger.
Mm.
And we don't have a real good way at this point to tell the difference between a man who will basically outlive his prostate cancer and a man who will be killed by his prostate cancer. And so this is why, we've developed the PSA test. But when we talk about that, we'll see that, like many tests, it doesn't really give us as many answers as it brings up questions. And this swelling, as we also said, can lead to urinary problems. And I mentioned that, with the prostate, they're pretty active in doing biopsies. But even I was surprised that if a man is having lower urinary tract symptoms, and when I got men over 60 to talk to me, almost all of them admitted to some lower urinary tract symptoms. What modern medicine wants to do is to inject dye into the bladder,
Mm-hmm.
which I do not think is a good idea. Or, I thought this was extremely clever, insert a tiny telescope through the penis so that they can look into the bladder. I have a friend who has multiple sclerosis and is incontinent, and when they told her they wanted to put a camera through her urethra to look into her bladder, she looked at them and she said, hey, I have multiple sclerosis. Isn't that enough? Let's leave the rest of my equipment alone.
Right.
So even catheterization for some people, of course, can be irritating, painful,
Mm-hmm.
and to say the least, counterproductive and damaging. So what we're going to be doing is looking at the great array of herbal home remedies, homeopathic remedies, and mind-body modalities that we can use to help us to have our prostate make us happy instead of have our prostate make us unhappy, which is happening to a lot of men. Now, one of the herbs that I focus on in the prostate section is saw palmetto. And there's so much controversy swirling around saw palmetto, as there is around any herb that seems to be really quite effective. In James Duke's many books, he cites studies that show that saw palmetto blockades androgen receptors, inhibits 5-alpha reductase, thus reducing the conversion of testosterone into DHT. Obviously, we can tell that DHT is something we don't want. Here's two pathways to make a problem for it. Saw palmetto disrupts the arachidonic cascade, which counters inflammation and relieves lower urinary tract symptoms. Saw palmetto competes for estrogen receptors, thus helping to prevent prostate cancer, and it directly decreases lower urinary tract symptoms by reducing residual urine, reducing urinary frequency, reducing nocturia, and reducing painful urination. In fact, it has been shown time and time again to shrink the entire prostate. Nonetheless, it seems like almost every year there's some article, saw palmetto found to be ineffective. So I tried to get to the bottom of this because I'm always curious about these things. And I ask around, I ask men if they've taken saw palmetto, and I ask them if it was effective for them. And a pattern that I expected, interestingly enough, emerged pretty quickly. And that was that men who had used saw palmetto as a tea, which was the way the native people did it, and believe me, most people won't use it as a tea because it really smells strong and tastes even stronger. They got good results. And men who use it as a tincture, they get good results. And for some reason, it does not smell or taste so strong as a tincture, but it's still very effective. But men who've taken it in capsules did not get good results. And I asked two of those men who had taken it in capsules and not gotten good results if they would be willing to take saw palmetto tincture. And both of them got back in touch with me within a few months and wanted to know how they could make their own saw palmetto tincture. They said that they had never found anything that was quite as effective in reducing their lower urinary tract frequency, painfulness, dribbling, urgency, and so on. Dose of the tincture or standardized extract of saw palmetto is 2 to 4 dropperfuls twice a day. I know that may sound like quite a lot of herb, but what we find is that it really helps to start with a very high dose of saw palmetto, and once the symptoms have actually abated, then you can move down to a maintenance dose of 1 to 2 dropperfuls a day. And, of course, with that, it makes a lot of sense to make your own saw palmetto tincture. And I do talk about how to do that's extremely simple in my book down there. Millions of European men and more than 2 million American men are currently taking saw palmetto. It is a plant which there is plenty of critics claim that taking it can artificially lower prostate-specific antigen, but Dr. James Duke is not worried. To one degree or another, he says all plants contain PSA-reducing sterols. Most beans contain PSA-reducing sterols and genistein, an alpha reductase inhibitor, but I don't see any advisory against eating beans if you're a man who has a prostate. Herbalist Ryan Drum, I'm going to give him the last word, says, I'm loath to prescribe saw palmetto unless absolutely necessary. It seems to have an erosive, feminizing effect on the male body. So you can decide for yourself if it's a miracle cure or if it's having an erosive effect upon your body. This is Susun Weed here, and this is our introduction to your friend, the prostate. I'm so glad that you were able to join us, and we're going to be back next week talking about that alphabet soup, BPH, LUTS, and PSA. Green blessings.
Thank you, Susan, for taking us on a journey through your connection to the earth and her green allies. Next week, we will continue our discussion on the men in our lives and their prostate health. Susan will discuss PSA, BPH, and LUTS. On behalf of Time Monk Radio, green blessings and be well.